We can really say that Taoism can be divided into three main types. There's religious Taoism, that is largely based upon religious ceremony and ritual. This is the kind of Taoism that takes place in temples and monasteries that you find if you go into China. It has a religious hierarchy of priests and monks and things like this, everything you would expect from an organized religion. Then you have philosophical Taoism, sometimes called folk Taoism, you know. This is kind of the Taoism that you might encounter on a sort of casual basis when people quote the Tao Te Ching or talk about sort of some concepts of feng shui or something like this. We could maybe say this is a little bit superstitious, but this is a kind of Taoism that has sort of permeated down through Chinese culture, which is why, you know, especially with elderly people in China, you find they normally have some kind of concepts of Taoism or something like this. Then the third kind of Taoism, really we could call alchemical Taoism. So alchemical Taoism is really a practice-based tradition that is free from religious hierarchy or worship or ritual, and takes the stance that anything that can be philosophically understood or intellectually studied or taught within the classics also has the basis in a practice. And the idea is that if there is no methodology, if there is no concrete experience of the philosophy of Taoism within the body, within the energy system, within the mind, then it's kind of useless. That's their take on it. So arts like Qigong and Nei Gong and arts like this, they come out of the alchemical tradition. These days, scholars will argue over whether these divisions of Taoism really exist, or whether originally it was all one great tradition and there should be no separation into these three strands. And this argument goes on, but the argument is kind of irrelevant because ultimately these days this distinction does exist. It is there. This is the way the tradition has developed. So, you know, this is what we encounter when we practice. So within Lotus Nei Gong, we're primarily from the alchemical tradition of Taoism. Okay, I've had some experience, some teachings within the religious systems, but it's not really my main interest. Primarily, I'm an alchemical Taoist, which is why Qigong, Nei Gong, and Nei Dan are my key focuses within my teachings. So alchemical Taoism is the core of what I do, is the core of what I teach. This is where the majority of my experience has been within the spiritual path. And it's the Taoist lineages that I've had the most contact with, and this is where I spend the majority of my mental effort really, is trying to study and understand these traditions. But on top of that, I'm also initiated into a Buddhist line, and I have a lot of experience with Buddhism as well. I have some experience in Southeast Asian Buddhism, but primarily I'm from within Chan Buddhist lines, Chinese Buddhist lines. So therefore, there is a underpinning of these teachings within what I do as well. On top of this, I've also explored teachings from Hinduism within India, and then also a lot of the sort of Southeast Asian, we can kind of call them fusion traditions, I suppose I would call them, because you see historians or whatever trying to label them as Hindu or Buddhist or whatever, but actually I think it's a little bit more mixed than this. Basically, what it means is that I have a main thread for what I do. I have a main tradition that I stay within because I always think people need a main road, a main path. And then what I have is these little sort of sub-branches of study that I've done that just help to enrich the experience of the main path that I walk down. So if I had to say what Lotus Nei Gong's tradition was, I would say it's probably 70% to 80% Taoism from the alchemical tradition, but then it is supported by the other practices and the other teachings that I've had encounters with along my travels over my many years exploring and studying different traditions in different parts of Asia. So if we had to look at what are sort of the, maybe we could say, unique qualities of alchemical practice within the Chinese traditions at least, we could say that there's a kind of coming together of the teachings of body work, energy work, and then mental or conscious development that people would be familiar with within kind of meditative traditions. Sometimes you see people talk about Taoism, all they want to talk about is Jing, Qi, Shen, essence, energy, and spirit, and they talk about circulating Qi up and down and through the body and opening the channels and meridians, and that's it, that's all they want to talk about, as if that there is the potential for a kind of spiritual awakening that's going to happen just through this kind of work, but this really isn't true. There still must be development of certain qualities, certain mental qualities, certain qualities of awareness through meditative training as well. And this is really where alchemy kind of brings these two together, because what we have is the development of a meeting point between meditation, okay, and the energetics that people would normally associate with Taoism, with something like Qigong or Nei Gong as well. When these two come together, this is really where the bridge across into spiritual development really it becomes available to people. So they classically say that the essence must support the energy, which then must support the spirit. So we can kind of think of it like, the more efficiently you make your body function through these teachings, the more the body is able to produce this kind of energy, this thing we call qi, which is really the kind of substance, the fluid of the interface between the mind and the body. And then what happens is this qi goes on to fuel something. Now we have a choice. This qi can either fuel the mind, okay, in its most acquired, its most base level, or it can go on to nourish our connection to spirit, to original self, to Tao, okay, whatever term you want to place upon it. So the idea is essentially through the development of conscious awareness that we gradually open up a kind of space, if you like, through which the energy passes in order to nourish our connection to Tao, connection to something higher, something spiritual. So when these two come together, okay, the energetics and the conscious development, this is really when you have true alchemy, true internal alchemy. This was really the epitome of the teachings within the Chuanzhen or Longmen traditions of Northern Taoism. Really the kind of peak of what they were trying to do, the studies they were trying to pass on down through the generations. Now, Qigong is probably the most commonly known, the most widely spread of the traditions that came from alchemy, and really what we know Qigong as primarily as a kind of medical practice, you know, a kind of way of developing the body and developing the health, relaxing the mind and developing the breathing and so on and so on. And really what I could say is that Qigong is kind of a gateway in, it's kind of the first step along the path. And the reason we use Qigong along with Daoyin exercises and practices such as Tai Chi, Bagua, stuff like that, is to develop the efficiency of the body's functioning. That's really what we're talking about. So I would say that the quality of a person's health is down to two things. One, the efficiency of the body's functioning. That is it. How efficiently does your body function? And the second thing is how aligned is your life path with original spirit. If these two things are developed, and we can call one of them the path of Ming and one of them the path of Xing, if they move into harmonization, then essentially what happens is a foundation in good health, mental and physical, is built upon which everything else is developed. Qigong is one way to do this, one way to access this side of our well-being, to make it move in the direction we want it to. But then we have something more complex called Nei Gong. So Nei Gong, sometimes people say is just an older term for the same practice as Qigong, but it's a little different. If you look at how they define Nei Gong, largely what they're talking about is a developmental process of taking your body, your internal system, beyond the efficiency we would assume is possible. So a lot of the kind of physical skills that seem a little bit out of the ordinary that you might see from the internal arts, they can come from Nei Gong. And the energetic abilities that seem a little bit out of the ordinary, like the ability to issue qi out of the body and so on and so on, this is coming from something that we understand as the Nei Gong process. Now, we don't use these practices solely for the aim of developing skills, with the exception of sometimes people use these to develop skills to assist in their medical usage. So acupuncturists or therapists or something might use these kind of trainings to increase their efficiency. They can be a higher level of service to their patients then, to help them to alleviate their suffering. That's a valid use of it. But really what we do is we use these arts to train the efficiency of the energy system beyond what people think is normal, beyond what they think they're normally capable of. So that then we know that the energy system and the body are functioning efficiently enough that we can produce enough qi that can be sent up to nourish our connection to spirit. So in order to open that gateway, this is where it becomes important to study meditative training, okay, to understand what is it, how do we develop a sense of unification between the object and the observer in order to step over the bridge into a meditative state. Here we have the ability to move towards varying stages such as self-realization or awakening, which in Taoism are discussed as very, very different things, or even at the higher end of the scale, enlightenment or immortality, which are once again not the same thing. They are very different states of attainment, certainly within the Taoist tradition. So in this way, the efficiency of the body and its functioning supports the Jing, and then when we use Nei Gong to develop the quality of the Qi within the body so that internally it functions at a very high level, this then supports the development of the Shen, or the quality of the spirit, or the ability for us to move beyond the more surface layers of mind towards connection to something more divine, something that people know as Tao. And this is the path of spiritual development contained within our chemical Taoist traditions. And this is what I pass on within Lotus Nei Gong. The training takes many formats. People have all sorts of needs, all sorts of wants, and the training expresses itself in all sorts of different ways. I've long told people that ultimately, whichever branch of Taoism they choose to study, they're all leading to the same place. Taoism was all about unification with Tao. That was it. That was all it was concerned with. So whether it taught people through the martial path of Taiji or Bagua, which is certainly more suited to people that are more physically minded or like to work with their body, or whether they wanted to study through Nei Gong and the efficiency of the energy system, which tends to suit people that have a sort of introspective quality or want to study the nature of energetics, or whether they study it through alchemy, or whether they study it through medicine, which some people don't realize. The study of Chinese medicine is also a form of cultivation, because at the highest level of the art, it goes beyond helping people to relax and alleviate their pain. It also goes through to developing an understanding of the human condition and how to elevate above the human condition to a point where we can achieve union with spirit once again. So each of these different arts are just expressions of the same thing. They're all unified paths that lead to realization of Tao. Now, part of the reason that Lotus Nei Gong has these various branches is partially because I've studied so long and so obsessively that I've explored all of these branches, and also because, no two people are the same. Everybody has a different inkling, a different need, a different desire to study something and connects with a different part of the path. And this is really what makes Lotus Nei Gong so fascinating to be a part of as well. I mean, as a community, we have everything from Chinese medical therapists to martial arts practitioners to people who are studying meditation intensely and everything in between. And it's very interesting seeing what happens when all of these people who study Taoism and the internal arts in its different formats come together. I mean, it produces a marvelous community. So this is Lotus Nei Gong, and you're welcome to come see what we do at some stage if you want to.